Is Remnant from the Ashes better than Darksouls? I'd say yes, but the two are so different that it's almost unfair to compare them. This Better Than Dark Souls series started because I wanted to do a review of The Surge 2, a game I felt was unfairly criticised at the time. But OBS, the tool I used to record games, couldn't record games that used Vulkan. So I decided to review the entire Deck 13 series of games, my logic being that by the time I got back to The Surge 2, OBS would have been updated to support Vulkan. After the Lords of the Fallen video, the Surge 1 video got stuck in development hell and I eventually abandoned it, and not for the first time. Since then I've played Remnants from the Ashes, which might be my favourite Souls-like game yet. At very least, it's the Souls-like I'm most likely to go back and play through again. So it seems fair to make a video about it. But Remnants from the Ashes is such a large departure from Dark Souls, outside of a few similar mechanics like bonfires and dodge rolling, that it seems almost unfair to compare the two, but I'm going to do it anyway. Let's start with the story. I'm tempted to put a spoiler warning here, but I don't really think it's necessary, because once you pass the intro, the story in Remnants from the Ashes is almost non-existent. It's a threadbare excuse to get you to go to various biomes and kill bosses. After making your character, which is just cosmetic choices, they don their best Link cosplay, hop into a small rowboat and head towards a tower on an island. They're hit by a storm and wash up on an island. After running through a tutorial dungeon, you find yourself in a bunker which acts as your base of operations for the entire game. The rest of the story is basically you trying to track down a guy named Ford, who is the only one that can get you to the tower you were originally trying to get to. The story is mostly limited to the early game, and a few short conversations with NPCs throughout. You have options of what to say, but none of it has any real story impact. It has the Fallout 4 problem where it changes a sentence or two of dialogue, but ultimately sets up the same info dump. For example, in a desert level you meet a woman who treats you like a god. You could play this up or deny it, but it doesn't change anything as far as I can tell. What's baffling is that there's a large choice you make around halfway through the game that doesn't really affect the story, but has a great effect on gameplay. The rest of the story is told via journals, which I mostly ignored due to them being long and boring. The game's setting seems to be post-apocalyptic, although the exact year is unclear. I think it's somewhere in the late 1980s, judging by the journals and the simple computer terminals you find dotted about the place. Likewise, I'm not sure if the entire world is ruined or just this part of it. This is likely explained in the lengthy journals that I ignored. The gist is that evil tree creatures known as the Root have started growing everywhere and killing off people. Your goal is to kill them off at the source. The game follows a simple structure. There are 4 biomes in the base game: Earth, Desert, Swamp and Forest, with a 5th snow biome being added in the DLC. Each has their own enemies that vary in difficulty, abilities and tactics. For example, the forest guys will hand back and shoot you with arrows and use acrobatics to dodge attacks, whereas the desert guys are brutes that charge in with spears, dogs and floating skulls. Despite the differences in enemies, the general gameplay of each biome is the same. You have an area shaped like a mangled cross. In the middle is a door that you can only open from the other side. You raid dungeons until you find the one that leads to the other side of the door. Once on that side of the door, you have to find the next dungeon, which will lead to the next area, or has a key item that you need to progress the story. Wash, rinse and repeat. The dungeons are all randomly generated. I usually hate randomly generated levels since they tend to be various flavours of bland, and these are no different, though the gameplay is skill based enough that it's usually fair. Though being randomised does mean the clever looping design of games like The Surge isn't present, and it's possible to get lost in dungeons that have the same rooms repeating over and over. Most dungeons have a random boss at the end. Each boss has its own arena and drops a unique item. Some bosses even have alternative kill methods that allow you to get a different unique item. To use a DLC boss as an example, there's a giant rat man riding a giant mole rat. Killing one gets the other one powered up. Kill the mole rat first and you get the rat man's sword. Kill the rat man first and you get a special assault rifle. But here's where the randomized dungeons make sense. There's more bosses in the game than what you'll fight in a single run. So you'll want to play the game multiple times to see all the content and get all the loot. This also means the game doesn't outstay its welcome on a single playthrough. My first multiplayer run took about 10 hours, with my single player run clocking in at about twice that, though that did include the tutorial and me faffing about with survival mode. I imagine 8 to 10 hour single player runs would be possible once you know what you're doing. As a result, it's a breezy playthrough that's easy to jump back into. I normally don't replay games straight away, but I'm partway through my third playthrough at time of writing. It's not just the randomness either, but the choices that you make that make it replayable. In the first area there's a tree you can talk to. You can kill it for items, but if you find a tree mask, you can talk to it for a different item. I already mentioned the alternative boss kills, though I don't think there's any shame in looking up how to do those. I mentioned a major choice earlier in the video. About halfway through the game you come across a character called the Undying King who wants the Swamp Guardian's heart in exchange for the key to the Forest Zone. There's a Moth Woman who also wants the heart. You can give the heart to either one and they'll give you unique items. I think it's even possible to skip the swamp biome entirely by killing the Undying King as soon as you meet him, taking the key, and then heading straight to the forest biome. You probably won't do this first time through, but it's strange that the game is set up to allow you to skip a quarter of its content. Remnant from the Ashes is a shooter first and foremost, with the Darksouls elements added on top. This isn't really Dark Souls with guns instead of bows. I want to start by busting 3 myths that put me off from trying the game for a long time. First, melee plays a large role and it's possible to build a melee focused character, but guns are the main form of attack, especially when it comes to flying enemies and bosses. 2. Ammo is plentiful. When I was told that ammo had to be rationed, it gave me Vermintide flashbacks. While I liked Vermintide, guns were usually saved for special occasions in that game, not so in Remnant. Ammo can run out if you waste it, but there's generally enough to do what you want, and there is a ring that allows you to carry more if you prefer to spray and pray. And myth number 3, you do have to aim in order to shoot, but the camera is far enough back to make it workable in close quarters. It's more like Resident Evil 5 than Call of Duty, and it works well for short to mid-range shooting, and a scoped sniper rifle can be found in the first biome. I might as well address a complaint that a friend had while I'm here. While you can build characters in certain ways, heavily armoured characters aren't going to be able to face tank a boss. The only Souls-like game I know that came close to that was Lords of the Fallen, and even then you generally wanted to dodge attacks or block bosses when you could. With those myths out the way, let's get into the game proper. As mentioned, there's a fairly simple but adequate character creator, giving you enough to customize without bogging you down with sliders. You choose a class at the start of the game as well, but the starting gear for the other classes is available at the shop for a reasonable price. The starting traits can also be found in random dungeons on Earth. The 2 main ways to build your character are gear and traits. Gear has several elements. For weapons you have a small gun, a long gun, and a melee weapon. Guns can have mods that charge up when you deal damage and range from grenade launchers, summoning minions, and even spells. Armor comes in 3 pieces: head, chest, and legs. Each has a passive ability that you get for wearing any one piece, and a gear set bonus that gets better when you wear multiple pieces. For example, wearing any piece of the hunter armor gives you a passive 20% reduction in weapon spread. This effect does not stack by wearing multiple pieces of the Hunter set. However, you also get a damage buff to ranged weapons, and that increases based on how many pieces of the gear set you wear. 5% for a single piece, up to 20% for a 3-piece. This adds a fair bit of strategy to deciding what armor to wear, since you might want a bunch of the individual buffs, or maybe you want a full gear set buff, or something in between. Finally, there's jewelry, a necklace and 2 ring slots to be specific. Necklaces tend to be more powerful than the similar rings, and some are straight upgrades, while others come with drawbacks, like reducing the fire rate of a weapon for increased melee damage. As should be obvious, you can create some interesting builds using these gear sets. Early on you'll work with what you have, but as you progress you'll start to refine your build. So if you were doing a build that relied on weapon mods, you might go for armor that increases weapon mod generation speed, a necklace that increases mod damage, and rings that increase mod duration or elemental damage depending on the mods you're using. And that's just one example. One problem I have with the system is that weapons and armor can be upgraded with crafting materials. This creates a problem where if, 2/3 into the game, you find some gear that you like, you've already put so much into upgrading your current gear, are you really going to spend the resources to upgrade your new gear up to par, or are you just going to keep using the old one? It's a good thing then that even the starting gear remains viable throughout the game. I finished the game with the starting armor and I continue to use it post game. Traits are permanent passive buffs to your character. Traits have to be found, usually by doing something special like using so many weapon mods or beating a certain boss. You get 1 trait point when you get enough experience points or by collecting a duplicate piece of gear. You can then put these points into any trait that you have, and each trait can go up to the rank of 20. Each individual rank is insignificant. An extra 0.75% ranged attack damage isn't going to change the game, but you put 20 ranks into it to get it to 15%, add in gear sets that boost ranged damage and maybe a ring to give you damage stacks for ranged kills, and suddenly you have a long range DPS machine. All this time and I've not talked about the basics, but it's hard to think of what to say about the shooting and melee mechanics that you can't already tell from the footage or by what I've said so far. The guns are fun to use, the melee feels good, nothing outstanding, but it's good. Resting at a crystal, the game's equivalent to bonfires, heals you, refills ammo and mod power at the cost of respawning the enemies. All the usual stuff you expect from a Souls-like game. As mentioned, due to the randomized dungeons, you don't really learn the levels in any meaningful way. Unlike Dark Souls, you don't lose anything when you die. It takes a lot of stress out of the game, allowing you to get back to playing the game. Crystals are also placed right outside boss rooms, so there's no gauntlet of enemies to run past. There's no real gotcha moments or beginner's traps, no real traps of any kind really, outside of one puzzle in the DLC. Again, this might be something I put down to the random generation, meaning they can't design interesting hazards that are balanced and fun. The closest it comes is a speedrun dungeon where you have to get through it while constantly losing health. One big highlight of Remnant over Dark Souls and its clones is that the co-op actually works in the way it should. Bosses and enemies don't seem to scale, unfortunately, but it does have common sense features like being able to join friends directly or being able to rest at a bonfire without having to jump through hoops. In most Souls-like games, to rest in co-op you have to get your teammates to disconnect, rest, get an item from your inventory, write a summon, tell your friend where you wrote the summon, then try and have them join you without something going wrong somewhere. Repeat this process every time someone's connection drops or someone accidentally dies or uses all of their healing items. Here, you click Join a Friend's Game on the main menu, and when you've joined, that's it. Done. You spawn at the next rest, and If you all sit at a bonfire at the same time, the bonfire works as normal. The host can even warp the party to a new area. It's so simple, straightforward and obvious that it makes me wonder why games like Code Vein and Darksouls do it the other way. But Remnants from the Ashes isn't without its problems, one of which is that the game is designed around co-op. While the game is doable single player on normal difficulty with only a couple of difficulty spikes, playing on any difficulty above that is basically impossible without heavy grinding or cheesing the game. A great example is a scene where you have to protect a target against a wave of enemies. On normal it was tough, but I managed to make it. On hard mode it felt almost impossible even with nearly maxed out gear. I did get it eventually, but it was certainly tough. And far tougher than it seemed to be intended to be. When I played it in multiplayer, the fight was trivial. I could be wrong, but the game doesn't seem to balance the fight based on player count, and the balance for the fight seems to be assuming 2 or 3 players. This focus on co-op might explain why summoning builds are so powerful in single player. Sure, they might do chip damage, but if a boss or an elite is designed to be vulnerable from behind while they focus attacks on one player, that's not something a single player can capitalize on without an AI teammate. You also get much more experience points, money and resources in co-op as well. XP, money and materials are shared between all players, but since you're covering more ground and chewing through content faster, it means more of everything. Add in a 5% proximity buff to damage and XP gains, and playing online is the way to go if you care about character progress. It's a shame then that playing with randoms online isn't good. It's not uncommon to join a game only to have everyone idling at home base or someone who steals all the items in survival. Another problem is the amount of bugs in the game. The game is stable for the most part. I had no crashes and the game ran smoothly most of the time. There was no hit detection problems that I can recall. There was one lockup during the previously mentioned church segment where I died, but the game didn't take me back to the crystal, leaving me in limbo until I Alt F4'd out the game, but that was one lock in 70 hours of gameplay. But multiplayer has problems. Dodges don't seem to give invulnerability frames sometimes. I'd get hit by attacks that didn't seem to exist. I was once grabbed by one of the few attacks that results in a quick time event, only to have the buttons not respond. I once died even though my body was still standing.
I was stuck reloading, so I just punched him.
Yeah, you punched him, I leveled up so my character stood up, and then it's come up, you are dead. So
yeah, I see you standing right here, but you're dead.
One time I died and I wasn't put into a down state, I was just instantly put into the super dead state. Most of these problems I put down to lag. So I'd see an enemy in one place, the host would see them in another, and on my end I'd get killed by an attack that I didn't know existed. Or I'd dodge an attack, but that information wasn't sent to the host in time, resulting in me taking a hit. This kind of stuff is annoying, but understandable if that really is the case. Having dodge be client-side could open the door to cheaters and sync issues, but given that playing with randoms is a mess anyway, I wonder if the trade-off would have been worth it. Though not all these issues can be blamed on the internet, the problem with QTEs ignoring my input happened to the host of that game as well.
Yeah, he wasn't responding to me hitting E.
I should also mention that some of my friends have expressed frustration at grinding areas over and over again, chasing some specific drop and not getting it. Getting sick of a specific biome in the process. I've not played enough for me personally to get to that point of frustration, but given the random nature of the game, I can believe it. At time of writing, I've still not found the pocket watch item despite running Earth multiple times, though unlike most people, I stop playing a game once the grind becomes boring. Also, the level scaling seems to be based on the average of all players' gear score, meaning that someone joining with a fully geared character can raise the average level of the enemies, resulting in enemies hitting harder and taking more damage than usual. It's not a huge problem as the game is mostly skill based, and I assume that playing with level appropriate characters would fix the problem, but I thought I'd mention it. The final thing I want to talk about is, well, the end of the game. I won't spoil the story, but it will suffice to say that the story ends on a flat note, even though the ending does its best to make it exciting. The problem will take a while to explain. The hardest boss in the game is a pair of giant moths you fight on a bridge about 3/4 of the way into the game. Most of the rest is fairly easy in comparison, including the final boss. The moth boss is the Swamp Guardian I mentioned before, and I think that it can be skipped if you make the right choices, but that would skip an entire biome, and the boss fight you have to win to do that isn't exactly a pushover either. I'm not saying that the last boss is easy. The problem is that the 3/4 mark is such a steep difficulty spike that once I battled my way through, the rest of the game was almost a stroll in comparison. It's like climbing up a mountain, and then 2/3 of the way up you hit a bad storm. You keep on climbing, battered, bruised, but not broken. You keep climbing on only to find it fairly straightforward the rest of the way. As for the DLC, it has a sequel bait ending versus the base game's more definitive ending. I know it doesn't really sound like it from this video, but Remnants from the Ashes might be my favourite Souls-like game so far. At very least, it's the one I'm most likely to go back to. Part of that is likely my love of shooting games. While I don't care for the randomised dungeons, I don't hate them either. The randomised bosses and the large amount of interesting gear I've yet to find makes the prospect of playing through it appealing. The shorter length and more forgiving difficulty helps as well, greatly cutting down on the frustration while still being tough enough to be engaging. Add in more convenient multiplayer, and it's better than most of the Souls-like games I've played. It has its flaws, like the lackluster story, but that's more room for improvement than something that ruins the game. As I finish writing the script for this video, I can't help but feel this video is a bit thin. There's stuff I didn't talk about, like the enemy design or the way each biome has a unique status effect or damage element. It's all well done, but I don't think I have much to say about them, and I don't want to pad out the video with me flatly describing the game to you. It's also hard to say whether or not this is better than the Surge 2, not least of which because I played the Surge 2 when that game had just come out, whereas this I've played after it's been out a while and it's had DLC and patches and whatnot. But either way, it was a fun game. Thanks for watching. Bye.